Have you ever wondered what secrets lie hidden beneath Michigan's lakes and forests? What if the calm waters and quiet woods are guarding stories far older and stranger than anyone can explain? From mysterious stone carvings to lost copper that vanished without a trace, these are not just tales, they are unsolved legends that refuse to fade. Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where we dig into the mysteries history forgot. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Whispers beneath Michigan's quiet forests, beneath the wide, endless canopy of Michigan's forests, where the morning mist drapes itself like soft silk over the ground, there is a silence that feels different from anywhere else. It is not an empty silence, but a silence that breathes, a silence that watches, a silence that remembers. When you walk far enough, away from the roads and the chatter of the towns, the sound of the modern world fades until all that remains is the whisper of leaves above and the soft crunch of the earth beneath your feet. And it is then, when you are completely still, that you begin to feel it, the presence of something ancient lingering just beyond what the eye can see. These forests have stood here for thousands of years, growing and dying and growing again, like the slow rhythm of breath. They have witnessed people come and go, lives rise and vanish, and their roots are tangled not only in the soil but in the deep history of this land. To walk among these trees is to walk among stories that are no longer spoken, stories that live only in the wind and the stones. The people who lived here first, the Anishinaabe, understood this better than anyone. They believed the land was alive with spirits, that every tree and every river carried its own memory. They would tell you that these forests are not just quiet, they are listening. If you rise before the sun, before the light has fully touched the treetops, and wander into the woods, you'll find that the world moves differently in these hours. The air is cool and damp, and your footsteps feel louder than they should. Dew clings to blades of grass, catching the faint light and making the ground look as though it has been sprinkled with stars. A single bird might call, sharp and clear, as though announcing the arrival of the day. The wind may stir faintly through the branches, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and wild flowers. If you pause, truly pause, you can hear the faint creak of old trees, the subtle sound of leaves brushing against one another, and it almost feels as though the forest is breathing in time with you. Some say that if you stand very still in these moments, the whispers of the past can almost be heard, soft voices, carried on the wind, just beyond comprehension. These woods hide more than just natural beauty. They hold traces of civilizations long vanished, of people who walked these paths long before anyone today. Among the most fascinating of these traces are the Sanilac Petroglyphs, found deep in Michigan's Thumb region. At first glance, these carvings in sandstone seem simple, but the closer you look, the more questions arise. Who carved these shapes? When? And why? The site is known as Ejibigadeka Sin in the Anishinaabe language, meaning written on stone, and for those who know how to read them, these carvings are more than images. They are teachings, stories, memories etched into rock. Spread across 1,000 square feet of fragile sandstone are over 100 symbols, human figures, animals, spirals and shapes that defy easy explanation. Among them is the bowman, a human-like figure caught in a moment of tension, bow drawn, arrow pointed toward an unseen target. Was this a hunter, a warrior, or something more symbolic, a spirit watching over the people? Others have suggested it represents a battle of cosmic forces, a story of balance and struggle between the earthly and the divine. Another figure, even more striking, is what many call the spirit being. A tall shape with what look like horns or rays extending from its head. It is both beautiful and unsettling, and no one can say with certainty what it represents. Some see a shaman dressed for ceremony, others a deity or a creature from vision quests, glimpsed in dreams and brought to life in stone. Around these figures are carvings of turtles, birds, and wave-like lines, as though the stone itself is a map of land, of water, of the spirit world. The age of the petroglyphs is uncertain. Sandstone is soft, easily worn by weather, and dating such carvings is almost impossible. Most archaeologists believe they were made between 300 and 1,000 years ago, during the late woodland period. But oral histories from the Anishinaabe suggest that they could be far older, possibly stretching back many generations before European contact. To the people who lived here, these carvings were not art as we think of it today. They were instructions, reminders, and guides. Elders say that each carving holds layers of meaning, some of which can only be understood after years of reflection. Unlike modern writing, which explains everything in plain detail, these symbols speak to the intuitive mind. They awaken something deeper, something that cannot be put into simple words. For a long time, the petroglyphs were hidden, shielded by dense brush and soil. Then, in 1881, a massive forest fire swept through Michigan's thumb, burning for days and clearing everything in its path. When the flames had finally died, the carvings were revealed, like a secret brought back into the light. Imagine the first people to see them after that fire, stepping onto the blackened earth and finding these strange, deliberate markings in the stone. It must have felt like uncovering a message from another world. But with exposure came danger. The elements, vandalism, and even well-intentioned attempts to preserve the carvings have all taken their toll. Some images have faded beyond recognition, and others have been damaged by visitors who traced the grooves with chalk or even knives, trying to make them stand out for photographs. Still, many of the carvings endure, almost defiantly, as if they are determined to outlast us all. Today, the site is co-managed by Michigan's Department of Natural Resources and the Saginaw-Chippewa Indian tribe. Ceremonies are held here again, offerings are made, and the carvings are being read not just through archaeology, but through the memories of the people whose ancestors created them. There is a feeling when you stand on that stone platform, a stillness that seems to hum just beneath the surface. Some researchers believe that the Sanilac Petroglyphs might be part of a larger network of ancient communication, stretching across the Great Lakes region. Similar carvings have been found in Ontario, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, always near water, always in places that seem to carry spiritual weight. It is possible that these sites formed a symbolic map, guiding people both physically and spiritually through the land, and yet, others have gone further with their theories. Some suggest that the petroglyphs are remnants of a civilization far older than we know, perhaps even older than the last ice age. They point to the abstract symbols as evidence of advanced knowledge, star charts, energy patterns, or even records of contact with beings from beyond this world. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss such claims, but when you stand at the edge of the petroglyph site, the forest crowding close around you, it is hard not to feel the weight of the unknown pressing in. There are, after all, carvings we can no longer see, stones that have been lost or destroyed. It's like reading a book with half its pages torn out, trying to piece together the story from fragments. Even now, after decades of study, the carvings give us more questions than answers. What kind of society created them? Were they meant for everyone, or only for those initiated into certain teachings? Were these symbols spontaneous, or part of a structured language we can no longer decipher? And how many stories vanished with the elders who were never asked to share their knowledge? Walking through the site, visitors are guided along a wooden boardwalk, looking down at the carvings as though peering into a window of the past. The forest is quiet here, the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. It's easy to feel watched, not in a threatening way, but in the sense that the place itself is aware of your presence. Some people say that if you visit just after sunrise, when the light cuts through the trees at a low angle, the carvings seem to glow, shadows deepen in the grooves, and the figures take on a life of their own. In those moments, it's easy to believe that the spirits carved into the stone are still here, still listening, and this is only one of Michigan's mysteries. Far to the north, past the quiet forests and into the wild waters of Lake Superior, lies Isle Royale, a place of rugged beauty, home to moose, wolves, and something far stranger. Beneath its forested ridges and rocky cliffs are the remains of ancient copper mines, dug thousands of years ago. These are not mines left behind by Europeans or industrial companies. They are far older, dating back 5,000 to 7,000 years, during what archaeologists call the Archaic period. Here, people with nothing more than stone tools mined native copper straight from the earth. The evidence is still visible. Hammerstones made from smooth lake rocks, pits dug into the bedrock, and traces of where copper veins were pried loose and carried away. The mystery is not that copper was mined, it's the sheer scale of it. By some estimates, more than 500,000 tons of pure copper were removed from this region in ancient times. 500,000 tons, mined with nothing but determination and simple tools. And yet, when we look at the archaeological record, we don't see where all that copper went. Copper artifacts have been found in burial mounds and ceremonial sites across North America, spear points, jewelry, tools, but these account for only a tiny fraction of what was mined. Where is the rest? Some scholars suggest that the copper was traded through vast networks, moving south along river routes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico and beyond. Others whisper of stranger possibilities. Could it have been taken by a culture we know nothing about, a civilization erased from history? And then there are the more speculative theories, the ones that say the copper was mined for purposes we can't even guess. perhaps by visitors not of this world. It's easy to dismiss such ideas, but standing on the shore of Lake Superior, with the waves crashing and the cold wind cutting through the trees, you start to feel how small our understanding of history really is. Lake Superior is not a lake in the ordinary sense. It is an inland sea, vast and deep, with storms that have swallowed ships whole and fogs that roll in like ghosts. Standing on its shore at dusk, watching the horizon blur into mist, you feel the weight of time pressing in. The copper mines of Isle Royale are quiet now, overgrown with moss and trees. But if you listen carefully, some say you can still hear the echo of hammerstones, the faint ring of copper being struck, a sound carried across centuries. The forests of Michigan hold more than beauty. They hold whispers of the past, fragments of stories etched into stone and buried in the earth. When you walk here, among the tall trees and the quiet lakes, it's hard not to feel that something is still watching, still waiting. Maybe it's the spirits of those who came before. Maybe it's simply the voice of the land itself, speaking in a language we've forgotten how to hear. Secrets the lakes have been holding for centuries. The Great Lakes have always felt like they belong to another world. If you stand on a quiet shore, far from the noise of towns and roads, the first thing you notice is the silence, as if the water itself is holding its breath. The horizon stretches endlessly, and it's hard to tell where the lake ends and the sky begins. The wind comes in softly at first, rustling through the grasses and trees, carrying with it the cool scent of water, pine, and stone. Every wave that curls onto the sand feels like the turning of a page in a book that's older than any story we know. These lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario, were carved by the slow hands of ice, shaped by the retreat of glaciers over 10,000 years ago. They are the remnants of a world that no longer exists, an echo of a time when mammoths roamed and the air was colder and heavier. Today, their surfaces shimmer with sunlight and dance with ripples, but below, beneath the quiet surface, lies a dark, unbroken history. It is as though the lakes are keepers of secrets, guarding stories so ancient and strange that they can only be heard if you sit still, listen, and let your thoughts sink like stones into the deep. If you have ever walked along the beaches of Lake Michigan early in the morning, just as the sun is breaking over the horizon, you know the feeling. The air is cool and damp. The sand, still dark from the night's dew, clings to your feet. The first gulls cry out overhead, their calls sharp and lonely, while the waves come and go with a sound like whispered words. You can almost imagine that the lake is alive, speaking in a language that we have forgotten. The early people who lived along these shores believed this. To the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, the Great Lakes were not just water, they were living spirits, beings of immense power. They knew that the lakes could nourish and guide, but they could also take and destroy. Before journeys, travelers would offer tobacco or a small gift to the water, whispering words of respect, because they understood that these waters were not passive, they were awake. Among the many mysteries the lakes hold, one of the most captivating lies beneath the surface of Grand Traverse Bay, part of Lake Michigan. In 2007, a team mapping the lake bed with sonar discovered something unexpected. A series of stones arranged in a circle, resting 40 feet below the surface. At first it looked like a natural formation, but the more they examined it, the clearer it became that these stones had been placed deliberately, set with intention by human hands. One stone in particular seemed to bear a carving, a faint but distinct shape of a mastodon, a creature that vanished from this land over 10,000 years ago. If the carving is genuine, it means the circle predates history as we know it. It means that thousands of years ago, when the waters of Lake Michigan were lower and the land was still open, people were building things we still don't understand. Some archaeologists think the circle could have been used as a hunting structure, guiding animals like mammoths and caribou across the open plains. Others believe it might have been ceremonial, a place where people gathered to honor spirits, mark the seasons, or call on forces larger than themselves. Imagine diving down through the cool, dark water to see it. The sunlight fades as you descend, replaced by a green glow, and then the shapes of the stones emerge from the murk. They are silent, covered in layers of silt and algae, but there's something undeniably purposeful in the way they stand. Divers who have visited the site say it feels like stepping into another time, a place where the air seems to hum with a memory so deep that words fail. When you see the carving, the outline of the mastodon etched into stone, your mind begins to wander. Who carved this? What did they think about when they looked at that massive animal, knowing it roamed the land just as they did? Did they imagine that one day their creation would be hidden underwater, forgotten? until a few curious eyes stumbled across it centuries later. The lakes do this. They bury things. They take what once stood in the open and pull it down into the dark, holding it there like a secret. This isn't just true for stones and carvings, but for entire worlds. Far to the north, in the coldest and wildest of all the Great Lakes, lies Isle Royale. To most, it is known as a remote national park, a place of wolves and moose, of dense forests and rocky shores, where the water crashes with the strength of an ocean. But hidden beneath its ridges and slopes are scars left by a people long gone. Thousands of years ago, the island was alive with activity, not of settlers or modern explorers, but of miners. These were not miners in the sense we think of today, with machines and drills. They were ancient people, using stone hammers to chip away at veins of pure copper that ran through the island like rivers of metal. The scale of this mining is almost impossible to comprehend. Archaeologists estimate that over 500,000 tons of copper were removed from the Keweenaw Peninsula and Isle Royale combined. These were not industrial operations. This was work done by hands, by persistence, by generations who knew where to look and how to shape what they found. Yet, despite this massive extraction, we find only traces of their work in the artifacts left behind. A few spearheads, some beads, a ceremonial plate here or there, but not enough to account for the sheer volume of copper taken. Where did the rest of it go? This question has haunted researchers for decades. Some suggest that the copper was traded far and wide, moving down rivers and across trade routes that connected the Great Lakes to distant cultures, the Hopewell Mounds in Ohio, the Mississippian cities along the Mississippi River, even tribes far to the south, near the Gulf of Mexico. But even this doesn't explain it all. There are whispers of other possibilities, of unknown cultures, of lost seafarers who might have come here from across the ocean. Most archaeologists reject these theories, but standing on the rugged cliffs of Isle Royale, with the wind howling and the water pounding below, you can't help but wonder. The silence of the place is heavy, and it feels as though the land remembers something that we do not. The Great Lakes are not just places of ancient mystery, they are also places of tragedy. Over 6,000 shipwrecks rest beneath their waters, each one a frozen moment in time. Some sank in storms that came out of nowhere, waves as tall as houses crashing down and tearing ships apart. Others were lost to fire, ice, or mistakes made in the fog. Each wreck has its own story, its own ghosts. Sailors speak of seeing strange lights out on the water, of hearing voices carried on the wind, of feeling the presence of ships that are no longer there. Perhaps the most famous of these ghostly tales is that of the Bannockburn, often called the Flying Dutchman of Lake Superior. In November of 1902, during a violent storm, the Bannockburn vanished. No wreckage was ever found, no survivors ever reached the shore. But for years afterward, sailors claimed to see a dark ship moving silently through the mist, its lanterns glowing dimly, its shape flickering like a shadow. They say it appears before storms, a warning to those who are paying attention. When you're out on the lake, far from land, with nothing but water stretching in every direction, it's easy to believe such stories. The fog rolls in thick and sudden, the horizon disappears, and all you can hear is the sound of waves. In those moments, the lake feels endless, as if it could swallow anything without leaving a trace. Not all of the lake's stories are of fear. Some are of love and memory, etched into the land itself. On the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, the Sleeping Bear Dunes rise high above the water. From their peaks you can see the Manitou Islands resting in the distance, their green shapes surrounded by endless blue. The Ojibwe tell a story of these dunes, of a mother bear and her two cubs. Long ago, a great fire drove them into the water. The mother swam for hours, turning often to check on her cubs. She reached the far shore, exhausted, and climbed onto a bluff to wait for them. But the cubs never came. The Great Spirit, seeing her love and sorrow, laid her down to rest and covered her with sand, forming the Great Dune. The two islands just offshore are her cubs, forever waiting to reunite with her. When you stand on top of those dunes, the wind whipping across your face, the lake stretching like a vast sheet of glass, it's hard not to feel the truth of that story. The land feels alive, as though it remembers the grief that shaped it. The sand shifts under your feet, moving grain by grain, slowly but endlessly, as if the dune is breathing. The Great Lakes have a way of blending history and myth until you can no longer tell them apart. They do not reveal their secrets easily. They hold them tightly and patiently, under layers of water, sand and time. There are places where old forests still rest, submerged since the Ice Age, their trunks preserved in the cold, dark depths. There are places where strange lights flicker beneath the surface, vanishing when approached. There are stories of voices, carried not just by wind but by something older, something that seems to rise from the water itself. As night falls, the lakes grow even more mysterious. The sun sinks low, painting the water with colors that shift from gold to pink to deep violet. The first stars appear, reflected on the surface like scattered diamonds. The waves grow quieter, their rhythm slower, like the calm breathing of a giant. If you sit there long enough, letting your thoughts drift with the sound of the water, you might begin to feel it, that quiet pull, that sense that you are not just looking at a lake, but at something far older, far wiser. The Great Lakes have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. They have swallowed ships and preserved their bones in silence. They have carried canoes and cargo, and they have turned storms loose without mercy. Through it all, they have endured. There is a strange comfort in knowing that these waters remember things we do not. They are guardians of time, holding on to the pieces of the past that we have let slip away. If you close your eyes and listen, really listen, you might hear it, the whisper of waves that once lapped against the shores of another world, the sound of stones being set in a circle by hands that have long turned to dust, the faint ringing of hammerstones against copper, echoing across millennia, the distant cries of sailors lost in fog, carried on winds that never forget. The Great Lakes are not just landscapes, they are living stories. They are the silence that waits for you at dawn, the sound of waves at night, the unbroken horizon that asks you to look deeper, think slower, and remember that the world is far older and stranger than we often realize. And as the last light fades and the stars take their place, the lakes keep their secrets, holding them for another century, another 1,000 years, waiting for someone quiet enough to listen. The first glimpse of the Sanilac Petroglyphs. There is something deeply moving about the first time you step into the quiet heart of Michigan's Thumb region, where the forests grow thick and the wind hums softly through the leaves. The world slows down here. The modern hum of life, engines, conversations, endless notifications, all fades to a distant memory. What remains is the whisper of trees, the rustle of deer moving just out of sight, and the sensation that you are walking across a place where time has taken on a different meaning. This is where the Sanilac Petroglyphs are hidden. For centuries they have lain in silence, etched into fragile sandstone, waiting for someone to come close enough to see, to feel, to listen. It is one thing to read about these carvings or look at pictures, but it is another thing entirely to stand on that wooden boardwalk, gaze down at the lines worn into stone, and feel your heart quietly pull itself into the past. The first glimpse is not dramatic or loud. In fact, you might even miss the carvings at first, because the sandstone is weathered, the figures softened by centuries of wind, rain and snow. But if you slow down, if you let your eyes adjust and your mind grow quiet, you start to see them, faint lines at first, then shapes, then entire stories rising from the stone. It is as if the rock itself is waking up beneath your gaze. The sandstone here is pale and smooth, unlike anything else around. It looks fragile, almost like skin, as though a single touch might erase the marks left behind. But these carvings have survived countless seasons, wild storms, forest fires, and the slow creeping touch of moss and water. They are not just random scratches, they are deliberate, purposeful, each one created with intention. The Anishinaabe people call this place Izibigadik Asin, which means written on stone. It is a name that feels like a key, a reminder that this sandstone outcrop is not simply a surface but a page, an ancient record that still speaks if you know how to listen. One of the first images you notice is the figure of the bowman. At first the lines are faint, just shadows where the stone dips slightly, but when the sunlight hits at the right angle, you can see the archer standing there as though frozen mid-action, bow pulled tight, arrow aimed at something beyond the rock. Was he a hunter, capturing the essence of a man stalking deer or elk across the ancient forests, or was he something more, a guardian spirit, protecting this sacred ground from forces both physical and unseen? Some elders say that the bowman could represent a warrior from a story long forgotten, or perhaps an ancestor whose spirit lingers in this place. Others say that the figure is not a man at all, but a reflection of cosmic battles, the kind of spiritual war between forces of light and dark, life and death, that echo in many native teachings. Whatever the meaning, there is power in the image. The lines are confident and sharp, cut by a skilled hand that knew exactly what they were doing. Nearby, another figure captures your attention. This one is larger, more mysterious. It looks like a being with horns or rays of light shooting from its head. Its arms stretch out, as if in a dance or ritual, and its body curves in ways that seem less human, more dreamlike. Some call it the spirit being. It feels ancient and otherworldly, a reminder that these carvings may not only be telling stories about the physical world, but about the unseen, visions, dreams, and spirits that walked alongside the people who created them. Was this being a deity, a shaman in ceremonial regalia, captured mid-transformation? Or was it a symbol of something we no longer have words for? Standing there looking at the carving, you can feel your own thoughts begin to blur, as though the stone is not just a surface but a doorway into something bigger. The petroglyphs are filled with animals too, turtles, birds, fish, and shapes that resemble waves or rippling water. Each of these symbols would have meant something to the people who carved them. To the Anishinaabe, animals were not simply animals. They were teachers, guides, and relatives. The turtle, for example, often represents the earth itself, Turtle Island, the land that emerged from the water in their creation stories. Birds might represent the connection between earth and sky, between the living and the spirits. The waves could speak of journeys, not just across water, but through life itself. There is no single way to interpret these carvings. The elders say that each person will see something different depending on what they need to learn. These are not meant to be read like the pages of a book. They are meant to be felt. You could spend a lifetime returning to this same sandstone outcrop, seeing the same figures over and over again, and still notice something new, a line you didn't see before, a connection you didn't realize was there. That is the nature of teachings carved into stone. They reveal themselves slowly, like water shaping rock over centuries. Dating the petroglyphs is almost impossible. Sandstone is soft, and the carvings wear down with each passing season. Most archaeologists believe they were created between 300 and 1,000 years ago, during the late woodland period. But oral histories tell a different story. The Ojibwe and Potawatomi speak of ancestors far older, of people who walked these forests long before Europeans arrived, who held ceremonies and offered prayers here, when the land itself was still wild and untouched. It's possible the carvings go back much further than the scholars think. Perhaps they are thousands of years old. Perhaps they are as old as the stories themselves, as old as the first voices that rose into the forest canopy in song. The history of the site is as mysterious as the carvings themselves. For a long time these petroglyphs were hidden from the outside world. Trees grew thick around them, covering the stone like a curtain. It wasn't until the Great Forest Fire of 1881 that the carvings were revealed again, their surface blackened by smoke but still holding their form. Since then the site has seen its share of challenges. Erosion has taken its toll, and well-meaning visitors have sometimes made things worse, tracing the carvings with chalk or even cutting into the stone to make them stand out more. Each mark, each careless hand, erases just a little of the past, and there are stories of elders standing by the site with tears in their eyes, watching as something sacred is worn away. Today there is an effort to protect and preserve what remains. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources works alongside the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe to manage the site, balancing public access with the need to keep the stone safe. Visitors are asked to walk gently, to stay on the wooden boardwalk, to look and listen without touching. Traditional ceremonies have returned to the site as well. There are offerings of tobacco, soft songs carried on the breeze, and moments of silence where you can almost feel the spirits gathering. What is perhaps most fascinating about the Sanilac Petroglyphs is that they do not stand alone. Across the Great Lakes region, from Ontario to Minnesota, there are similar carvings, human figures, animals, abstract symbols, all near water, all along old travel routes or places of ceremony. It is as though these carvings form a vast network, a map of both land and spirit. Some researchers believe they were part of a system of teaching, a way of guiding people not just through geography, but through life's deeper paths. When you stand at Sanilac, you are not just looking at one place, but at a piece of a much larger story that spans hundreds of miles and countless generations. And then there are the theories that stretch even further, reaching beyond what most scholars are willing to consider. There are whispers, quiet, fringe ideas, that the Sanilac petroglyphs could be remnants of a civilization even older than the Anishinaabe, something that predates the last ice age. Some claim that the abstract symbols resemble star charts, or energy diagrams, or even depictions of beings that did not come from this world. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these ideas as fantasy, but when you are there, standing on that stone as the wind moves through the trees, it is hard not to feel a weight, an awareness that you are looking at something far older than yourself. Perhaps the most haunting thought is not about what we can see, but what we cannot. Local stories tell of other stones nearby, carvings that were buried, stolen, or destroyed long before anyone realized their significance. What we have now is only a fragment, a few surviving pages from a book that has been mostly lost. Imagine the stories that are gone forever, burned away like the forests that once hid them, their echoes now lingering only in dreams and half-remembered legends. Even so, the Sanilac Petroglyphs remain. They persist, defying time, quietly waiting for those willing to slow down and listen. If you visit early in the morning, just as the sun rises and the dew clings to the leaves, you might see something extraordinary. The light, when it falls at just the right angle, brings the carvings to life. The lines glow softly, shadows deepen, and for a brief moment, it feels as though the figures are moving. The bowman's arm seems to tense, the spirit being's horns shine, and the animals ripple like they're about to step off the stone. It is a fleeting moment, gone as quickly as it arrives, but it leaves you with the sense that the stone is not just stone, it is alive, and it remembers. As you stand there, with the forest breathing around you and the carvings beneath your feet, a quiet realization settles in. These petroglyphs are not relics, they are not simply artifacts to be studied or photographed. They are messages, living and breathing, etched into the earth by hands that understood something we have nearly forgotten. They are teaching us still, even if we don't yet understand the language. And as the day warms and the wind moves softly through the trees, you find yourself whispering a thank you to the land, to the people who came before, and to the stone itself, for holding these whispers across the centuries. Stories carved into fragile sandstone. If you wander into the quiet corners of Michigan's forests, especially where the trees thin out and the light falls differently, you may stumble upon something that feels more like a whisper than a discovery. It is not loud or grand but subtle, so subtle that you might walk past it without noticing. A ripple of lines in the rock, a figure that emerges when the sun leans low, shadows gathering to reveal a story that was placed there centuries ago. These are the Sanilac Petroglyphs, a collection of delicate carvings etched into the skin of sandstone, a stone that is as fragile as memory itself. You cannot rush when you look at them. You cannot simply glance and move on. The sandstone requires patience. It asks you to slow down and let your eyes adjust, to step into the rhythm of the place. In the beginning, all you see are faint grooves and scratches. But as you breathe with the forest, as your gaze softens, the figures begin to come forward, one by one. It is like watching something emerge from mist. You start to see a bow drawn tight, a set of curved antlers, the shape of a turtle's shell. There is something deeply human about the act of carving into stone. It is as if the people who lived here long before us knew that everything else would fade. Leather rots, wood burns, voices vanish. But stone endures, at least it endures longer than most things. The sandstone here, however, is not hard granite or unyielding basalt. It is soft, almost tender, easily worn down by water and wind. And yet for centuries these carvings have persisted, holding on through storms, fires, and the slow erosion of time. When you see the lines still there, still holding their shape after hundreds of years, you feel a strange kind of gratitude, as though the earth itself decided these stories were worth keeping. The carvings are not random. Each figure, each shape, carries a weight of meaning, though much of that meaning has been lost to us. The Anishinaabe people call this place Izibigadacasin, written on stone. To them these are not merely pictures but teachings. Each line is a thread of knowledge, a reminder of something essential. Some of the carvings are spiritual, others symbolic, and some are layered with meaning so deep that only years of contemplation might begin to reveal them. Elders say these images are not meant to be read the way we read books. They are meant to be felt with the intuitive part of the mind, the part that listens to the wind and the heartbeat of the earth. When you stand in front of the sandstone, you begin to feel the weight of time pressing in. Who carved these images? What were they thinking as they worked, chipping away with stone tools, bending close to the rock, leaving behind something meant to last beyond their own lives? Perhaps it was a ceremony, perhaps a moment of vision. There is a carving known as the bowman, an archer, caught in the act of drawing his bow. His posture is strong, poised, as though the next breath might release the arrow. Some believe he is a hunter, but others say he is more than that. Perhaps he is a guardian, a symbol of protection for this place. Maybe his arrow is aimed at something we cannot see, something that exists only in the world of spirit. Not far from him is another figure, one that stirs the imagination even more. It is larger, more mysterious, a being with what looks like horns or rays bursting from its head. Some call it the spirit being. When you look at it, you cannot help but feel that you are staring at something otherworldly, something that belongs to both the earth and the sky. Was it a shaman, captured in the midst of transformation during a sacred ritual. Was it a god or an ancestor? Its form distorted by the weight of spiritual power, or was it simply an image of something seen in a dream, carved to remember a vision that words could not hold? The animals carved into the stone tell their own stories. Turtles, birds, fish, waves, each one connected to the land, the water, the sky. For the people who made these carvings, animals were not separate from humans. They were relatives, each with their own lessons and strengths. The turtle, for example, often represents the earth itself, Turtle Island, the great land that rose from the waters in the creation stories of the Anishinaabe. Birds connect the ground to the heavens, their wings carrying prayers and messages. Fish remind us of the waters that give life, of the need to respect and care for what sustains us. Every line in the sandstone feels like a conversation between the carver and the world they lived in, between the human heart and the spirit of the land. But for all that we can see, there is so much we do not know. Sandstone is soft, and time is relentless. Many of the carvings have faded so much that you can barely trace them with your eyes. Others have been lost completely, worn away by rain or scarred by careless hands. The site was not even widely known until 1881, when a massive forest fire swept through the area, burning the trees to the ground and exposing the rock for the first time in generations. Imagine that moment, the blackened earth, the smoke rising, and suddenly among the ash and ruin, these carvings appearing, glowing faintly, as though they had been waiting for that very moment to be seen again. Since then, the petroglyphs have suffered. There were times when visitors, not understanding their importance, would trace the lines with chalk or scrape at them with knives, trying to make them stand out. Each touch, each careless act, erases a little of the past. There are stories of elders standing quietly, watching tourists walk over the carvings without realizing they were stepping on something sacred, something that had survived for centuries only to be damaged by ignorance. It is a heartbreaking thing to see history vanish, not because of time, but because of carelessness. Now the site is protected. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources, together with the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe, has taken steps to safeguard what remains. A wooden boardwalk circles the sandstone, allowing visitors to view the carvings without touching them. Signs explain the history, but even those signs feel inadequate. Words on a panel cannot capture the feeling of standing there in the silence. The forest around you, the stone beneath your feet. You feel the presence of something older, something that does not need to speak in order to be understood. Some researchers believe that these petroglyphs were not isolated creations, but part of a much larger network across the Great Lakes region. Similar carvings have been found in Ontario, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, always near water, always in places of significance. It is as though these carvings form a path, a symbolic trail, connecting places of ceremony, trade, and spiritual importance. Perhaps they were messages left for travelers, not in words but in symbols, guiding them through the land both physically and spiritually. Of course, there are other theories, ideas that stretch beyond what most archaeologists accept. Some say that the Sanilac Petroglyphs might be older than we think, much older. There are whispers of a civilization, long before the Anishinaabe, a people who may have carved these images thousands of years ago, even before the last ice age. Others see the abstract shapes and claim they are star maps, records of celestial events, or even depictions of beings from beyond this world. Mainstream science dismisses these ideas, but when you stand at the edge of that stone, feeling the air shift around you, it is hard not to wonder. What we know for certain is this: the carvings are not random, they are deliberate, layered with meaning, and alive in a way that is hard to explain. Elders say that the petroglyphs are not just stories, but teachings. They are meant to be approached with respect, with quiet hearts and open minds. They are not meant to be decoded like puzzles, but to be experienced, to be lived with. Over time, as you return again and again, the carvings begin to speak in ways that go beyond words. One of the most powerful moments comes at dawn. If you are lucky enough to be there as the first light of morning touches the sandstone, you will see the carvings come alive. The shadows deepen, the grooves glow, and for a brief moment, the figures seem to move. The bowman's bow tightens, the spirit being's horns shimmer, the turtles and birds ripple like they are stepping out of the stone. It is a fleeting vision, gone as quickly as it comes, but it leaves you with the sense that these stories are not finished, that they are still unfolding, still waiting for someone to listen. The petroglyphs are more than history. They are more than art. They are a bridge between worlds. The world of the past and the world of now, the world of the living and the world of the spirits. When you walk away, you carry something with you. a feeling that lingers in the chest, a quiet reminder that we are all part of something much older and much larger than ourselves. These stories carved into fragile sandstone remind us that time is not a straight line, but a circle, and that every step we take echoes with the footsteps of those who came before. The mystery of the bowman and his silent arrow. There is a quiet figure etched into Michigan's sandstone, a figure that has stirred whispers for generations. He is not carved on a grand monument or framed by towering stone pillars. He stands on a weathered patch of sandstone, surrounded by forest and wind, his presence so subtle that you might not even notice him at first. Yet once you see him, you cannot look away. He is the bowman, a lone archer frozen in time, his bow drawn, his arrow aimed at something just beyond our understanding. His stance is deliberate, his posture alive with tension, as though the next breath might release the arrow he has held for centuries. But where is his target? Who or what is he pointing at? And what story does his silent arrow try to tell? When you stand in front of the carving, there is an undeniable feeling that the bowman is watching you as much as you are watching him. His form is simple, lines cut into sandstone, no colors, no paint, no lifelike detail. But somehow he carries more weight than many statues carved from marble. Perhaps it is because he is more than an image. He is a question, a reminder of something long forgotten, something that once mattered enough for someone to carve it into stone and trust that it would endure. The bowman is part of the Sanilac Petroglyphs, that fragile collection of carvings hidden in Michigan's Thumb region. The sandstone is soft, the kind that erodes with rain and wind, the kind that can crumble if you press too hard. Yet here he stands, centuries old, his bow still drawn. Archaeologists estimate these carvings to be anywhere between 300 and 1,000 years old, likely created during the late woodland period. But such numbers are guesses. Sandstone cannot be easily dated. What we know for sure is that this carving has witnessed generations pass, hunters, travelers, storms, fires, and now the curious gaze of modern visitors. When you first notice him, the bowman seems like a hunter. The bow is drawn, the arrow pointed. This is the image of someone taking aim. But the more you look, the more questions rise. His arrow is not aimed at an animal or a figure. It is directed at another symbol on the stone, something abstract, almost like a star or a strange spiral. Why would a hunter aim at such a thing? Perhaps he is not hunting at all. Some elders among the Anishinaabe people, who hold this site as sacred, suggest that the bowman is not about the physical world but the spiritual one. His arrow might be aimed at an idea, a force, an unseen danger. Maybe he is a guardian spirit, defending the sacred teachings carved into the rock. Or perhaps he represents a story of conflict, a battle between forces that we can no longer name. The posture of the bowman is dynamic. Unlike some petroglyphs that feel static, as though they are etched symbols, the bowman seems to have movement in him. You can almost feel the tension in the bowstring, the weight of the arrow balanced between release and restraint. This is not random scratching. This was carved by a hand that understood both the art of drawing a bow and the art of storytelling. To carve a figure like this into sandstone would have taken time, patience, and purpose. Every line had to be chipped carefully with stone tools, each stroke leaving a mark that would last for generations. Whoever made this image wanted it to be seen. They wanted the bowman to endure. Some researchers believe the bowman could represent a real hunter, perhaps commemorating a successful hunt or a warrior's skill. Others see him as part of a larger spiritual story, a figure caught in a moment of ceremony or myth. Among the Anishinaabe, bows and arrows are not just weapons but symbols. They represent focus, intention, and the ability to send energy toward a goal. Could the bowman be a metaphor for that? A teaching carved in stone, reminding those who see him to keep their aim steady, to direct their energy with purpose. Then there are the stranger interpretations. A few fringe theorists suggest that the bowman might not be human at all. They point to the way his form is carved, slightly elongated, the angles of his body not quite natural. Could he represent a spirit being, or even something otherworldly? It is hard to say. When you look closely, the lack of detail leaves room for imagination. His face is not clearly defined. He is more symbol than man, more energy than flesh. Standing in front of him, you cannot help but feel the weight of time pressing down. You start to wonder about the person who carved him. Who were they? What were they thinking as they bent close to the rock, chipping away at the sandstone, creating this figure one line at a time? Did they know that centuries later, Strangers would stand here staring at their work, trying to understand, or was their intention not about us at all? Perhaps they carved this figure for the spirits, for the earth, or for their own people, a message that we were never meant to fully understand. The forest around the petroglyphs adds to the mystery. The trees whisper in the wind, their leaves brushing together like soft voices. The light shifts across the stone, changing how the carvings look from one moment to the next. If you visit at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight strike the sandstone, the bowman seems to wake up. His lines deepen, his form becomes sharper, and for a brief moment it feels as if he might move. There is a strange energy in that early light, a sense that the carvings are not just pictures but doorways, portals to a time when the forest was alive with stories. The bowman's arrow is silent, but it speaks in its own way. It asks you to look closer, to wonder about what lies beyond what we can see. Perhaps that is why he was carved, to remind us of the unseen, to point not at an enemy or an animal, but at something we cannot name, something larger, something that still waits for us to notice. When archaeologists study the bowman, they often focus on the technical details. They measure the depth of the grooves, analyze the patterns, compare the style to other petroglyphs across the region. There are carvings similar to the bowman found in Ontario, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. It is possible that he is part of a network of symbols that stretch across the Great Lakes, a kind of ancient communication system. Some believe these carvings were part of a spiritual trail, guiding people both in the physical and the sacred sense. And yet no amount of technical study can capture the feeling of standing there, looking at that arrow. It is not just a piece of archaeology, it is something alive, something that feels like it is watching you back. The longer you stare, the more you feel as though you are being asked a question, one that has no easy answer. Time has not been kind to the bowman. Like the other carvings on the sandstone, he is fading. Rain and snow slowly wear down the grooves, softening the lines. Every year the carvings grow a little fainter. The forest tries to reclaim the place. Trees lean in, moss creeps across the edges, and the whispers of time grow louder. The site has been damaged in the past. Fires, vandalism, careless visitors who traced the carvings with chalk or scratched them with knives. Each mark erases a little of what was left. It is a race against time to protect what remains. Today the site is cared for by both the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe. There is a wooden walkway that keeps visitors from stepping on the stone. Signs gently remind you to look but not touch, to respect the place for what it is, a sacred space, not a tourist attraction. And yet, even with these protections, the bowman is vulnerable. Sandstone cannot last forever. One day, perhaps in 100 years, perhaps sooner, the bowman might fade completely, his arrow lost to time. But maybe that is part of the mystery. Maybe these carvings were never meant to be permanent in the way we think of permanence. Maybe they were meant to live for a while, to teach, to remind, and then to return to the earth. After all, everything fades eventually. The important thing is not how long the stone lasts, but what we carry from it while it is here. There are moments when you stand there, looking at the bowman, and you feel something stir inside you. It is not just curiosity, it is something deeper, something like recognition, as if some part of you remembers what the carving means, even if you cannot put it into words. The bow, the arrow, the steady aim, it all feels like a reminder of something ancient that still lives in us. The ability to focus, to direct energy, to hold our breath, and take aim at something important. At sunset, when the forest grows dark and the air cools, the bowman takes on a different presence. The shadows deepen, the carvings blur, and for a moment it feels as though he is drawing his bow not at a symbol, but at you. Not in threat, but in a kind of challenge. What will you aim for? What will you carve into the world that will last beyond your own time? The question lingers as you leave the site, following you through the trees and back to the world of roads and towns and noise. The bowman is silent, but his silence is not empty. It is full of meaning, full of stories that we have not yet learned to hear. His arrow is still drawn, still waiting. Perhaps it always will be. A spirit with horns watching over the woods. There is a figure carved into the sandstone of Michigan's forests that seems to watch you even before you notice it. It does not have the clear, familiar shape of a human hunter or the simple form of an animal. Instead, it rises from the stone like something caught between worlds, a tall, imposing figure with what appear to be horns or rays extending from its head. This spirit, etched into fragile sandstone centuries ago, has no voice, yet it seems to speak through its silence. Its presence lingers, not only in the carvings themselves but in the air, in the way the forest seems to still itself when you approach. It is as if the woods know you are entering a place where the line between the living and the spirit world is thinner, where the past and present mingle in quiet echoes. The Anishinaabe people, who hold the petroglyphs as sacred, sometimes speak of beings that live in both realms, beings that walk the edge between the visible and the unseen. Looking at this carving, you feel as though you are gazing at one of them, a guardian perhaps, or a messenger. The horns, or rays that rise from its head seem to radiate power, like the sun breaking through storm clouds, or like antlers glistening after rain. They draw your eye upward, away from the human world, and into something larger. This is not a simple animal or a hunter like the bowman carved nearby. This is something deeper, something older, something that seems to look through you rather than at you. When you first stand before the spirit with horns, the carving is not obvious. Sandstone is soft, and time has worn its features. At first glance, you might see only faint lines, shallow grooves that seem to form no pattern at all. But if you stand still and let your gaze soften, if you let the shifting light of the trees move across the stone, the figure slowly reveals itself. It emerges like a memory coming into focus, like a face appearing through mist. Once you see it, it's impossible to unsee. There it is, tall and commanding, its head crowned with lines that flare outward like energy. No one knows exactly what the figure means. Archaeologists can make educated guesses, and elders can share teachings passed down through generations, but the full story of the spirit with horns has been lost to time. Some say it is a powerful being connected to the sky, perhaps a spirit of the sun or the stars. Others believe it is a shaman, caught in the act of transformation, wearing a ceremonial headdress meant to bridge the human and spirit realms. There are those who say it is neither man nor God, but something that walks between both, an entity that watched over the people who carved these stones, guiding them in ways we can no longer understand. The act of carving a figure like this into sandstone was not casual. It would have taken patience and intention, each line carefully chipped with tools made from harder stone. It is believed that these carvings were made as part of ceremonies, moments when the physical and spiritual worlds overlapped. Perhaps the person who carved this figure had seen it in a vision or dream, during a time of fasting or solitude in the woods. Perhaps this figure represents a lesson or a story, meant to be remembered by the people who came after. What is certain is that the spirit with horns was not meant to be forgotten. It was placed here, in this quiet corner of the forest, as a reminder of something bigger than us all. Standing here now, centuries later, you can feel the weight of that reminder. The forest itself seems to lean in, its trees swaying softly, as if whispering old stories. The air is still, but there is a hum in it, a sense that you are not entirely alone. If you let your mind quiet, if you listen not with your ears but with the part of your heart that remembers things older than words, you might feel the presence of the spirit watching you. Not in fear, but in recognition, as though it knows that you too are part of this same earth, this same circle of life. The horns or rays on the figure's head are what draw the most attention. What do they mean? Are they meant to show power, like the rays of the sun? Are they antlers, connecting the figure to the animals that were so central to life and survival here? Or are they something else entirely? An energy, a force, a spiritual light? Some researchers have suggested that the horns could represent a headdress, worn during ceremonies, meant to invoke the strength of animals or the wisdom of the spirits. Others believe that the horns might not be physical at all, but symbolic, representing spiritual vision, the kind of sight that goes beyond the eyes and sees into the heart of things. It is easy to forget that for the people who carved this figure, the line between the physical and spiritual worlds was not as sharp as we make it today. The forest was alive with spirits. The rivers carried not just water but stories. Every animal, every stone, every tree was part of a larger living network, each with its own spirit and purpose. To carve a spirit into stone was not simply to create art, but to give form to something that was already there, something that needed to be acknowledged and remembered. There is a feeling that comes over you when you stand in front of the spirit with horns for too long. It is not fear, but something close to awe. You start to feel small, not in a diminishing way, but in the way that reminds you how vast and old the world is. You feel the weight of centuries pressing in, the knowledge that countless feet have walked this same path, that countless eyes have looked at this same carving, wondering what it means. You feel connected to all of them, as though the spirit etched into the stone is not just watching over the forest, but over every person who has ever paused here, trying to listen. There are other carvings nearby, turtles, birds, waves, human shapes. but the spirit with horns stands apart. It seems to hold the center of the stone, as though all the other figures revolve around it. Some elders have said that this spirit is like a doorway, a way of entering a deeper understanding. They speak of the carvings as teachings, each one holding layers of meaning that are not meant to be rushed or taken lightly. To understand them is not about looking harder, but about being still, about letting the meaning come to you when you are ready. Over the years, the spirit with horns has been slowly fading. Rainwater has pooled in its grooves, carrying grains of sandstone away. The winter snow and ice have cracked the stone. Fires have swept through the forest, scarring the land. And humans, with their curiosity and sometimes carelessness, have also left marks, chalk outlines, scratches, even carvings that try to mimic the originals, but only take away from them. Each act of damage is like erasing a word from a sentence, leaving the story harder to read. Yet, despite all of this, the spirit with horns endures. It is almost as though the stone itself is determined to hold on to this figure, to keep its story alive for as long as possible. Even when the lines are faint, when you have to squint to see them, there is still a power in the shape. It is not about clarity, but about presence. You can feel it as much as see it. Some visitors have said that when they stand in front of the carving at dawn or dusk, they can feel the spirit's gaze. The way the light falls across the grooves makes the figure seem to glow, its horns catching the last rays of the sun like fire. In those moments, it does not feel like you are looking at a piece of history. It feels like you are standing face to face with something alive, something that has been here long before you, and will be here long after you are gone. There are stories, passed quietly among local people, about strange dreams after visiting the spirit with horns. Dreams of animals speaking in the forest, of rivers that shine like silver, of voices singing in languages no longer spoken. Whether these dreams are simply the result of imagination or something deeper, no one can say. But those who have them rarely forget. It is as if the spirit leaves a mark not on the body, but on the soul. As the wind stirs the leaves around you, you realize that this figure is more than a carving. It is a connection. It connects the people who lived here centuries ago to the people who walk here today. It connects the living to the spirit world, the seen to the unseen. And in that connection, there is a kind of quiet guidance, a reminder to move through the world with respect, with awareness, with an understanding that every step we take leaves a mark, just as every line carved into this sandstone tells a story. Perhaps that is why the spirit with horns continues to draw people in. We may not understand its full meaning, but we feel its presence. We sense that it is watching, not as a judge, but as a witness, watching as the forest changes, as seasons pass, as generations come and go. It stands there, etched into fragile stone, holding a story that is as much about us as it is about the people who carved it. If you leave the site and walk back into the forest, the image of the spirit lingers in your mind. You find yourself looking at the trees differently, noticing the way their branches twist like antlers, the way the sunlight filters through the leaves like rays. You notice the silence of the woods, the way it hums with life even when no sound is heard. And you begin to feel that perhaps the spirit is not just carved into one patch of sandstone. Perhaps it is all around you, in the woods, in the water, in the quiet places where the earth still remembers. The sacred language lost in stone. There are stories that are never written on paper, tales that are passed down in whispers, in the movements of hands, in the rhythm of footsteps on soft earth. Some stories do not live in books at all. They live in stone, carved by hands that knew they were leaving something behind for the future. In the quiet woods of Michigan, there is such a story etched into sandstone centuries ago by people who understood that stone remembers things far longer than the voice or breath. Yet, over time, this story has begun to fade. Rain, wind, and careless hands have worn away its details, until what remains feels less like a book and more like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. This is the sacred language that has been lost in stone, the language of petroglyphs that once spoke with clarity but now falls into silence, waiting for someone who can still listen. When you stand before the Sanilac Petroglyphs, you can almost feel the presence of the language humming beneath your fingertips. The carvings are not random scratches or careless marks. Each line, each curve, was chosen for a reason. They were messages from people who believed that stone could carry meaning across time, that future generations could stand in the same place and feel the same truth. Some symbols are easy to recognize: a turtle, its rounded shell and legs stretched out as if swimming across the rock, a human figure with a bow drawn frozen in the act of a hunt or a battle, the outline of birds with wings outspread. But between these familiar shapes, there are other markings, spirals, intersecting lines, abstract forms that seem to speak in a language that has no direct translation. The Anishinaabe people call this place Ezibi Gadek Asin, meaning written on stone. It is not just an archaeological site, it is a living story, a sacred record of life, spirit, and memory. The elders tell us that these carvings were not made for casual viewing, like drawings on a page. They were teachings. They were lessons to be contemplated, their meanings unfolding slowly over years. Some symbols might hold stories of creation, of the relationships between people and animals, of journeys made, not just across land but across the spirit world. Others may have been maps, showing sacred places or trails that followed rivers and stars, and some, perhaps, are messages that only certain members of the community were meant to understand, codes of ceremony, visions from dreams, memories of ancestors that could not be spoken aloud. But what happens when the key to that language is lost? When the people who carved these symbols are gone, and their descendants have only fragments of the stories? When modern visitors come with cameras and quick glances, but no patience for the slow way of listening? This is the sorrow of the petroglyphs. The carvings are still here, but the language they speak has become quiet, a whisper of what it once was. The forest around the site seems to know the weight of this silence. The trees stand tall, their leaves moving gently like hands in prayer. The air is often still here, even when the wind moves elsewhere. If you stay long enough, you might start to feel as though the forest is keeping watch over the stones, protecting them as best it can from the passing of time. The boardwalk built for visitors creaks underfoot, a reminder that this place is fragile. You look down at the sandstone, and it looks back, holding shapes that feel both familiar and alien. What did they mean to the ones who carved them? What would they tell us, if we could still understand? There is one symbol that many return to when trying to unlock this language: the spiral. It appears in different places across the stone, sometimes alone, sometimes next to animals or human figures. Spirals are found in petroglyphs all around the world, from the deserts of the southwest to the cliffs of Ireland. They often seem to carry a sense of movement, of cycles, of something eternal turning over and over. Some say the spiral represents the journey of life, from birth to death to rebirth, a reminder that time is not a straight line but a circle. Others believe it marks the sun, the stars, the turning of seasons. Could the spiral here mean something entirely different, or is it part of a shared language that ancient people all seem to know, no matter where they lived? The sacred language of stone is not like the words we use today. Modern languages are built on letters and sounds, on grammar and rules. But this language is built on symbols that speak directly to the imagination, to intuition. It is less about reading with the mind, and more about feeling with the heart. The elders say that these carvings are meant to awaken something inside you, a kind of understanding that cannot be explained but only experienced. When you stand before them, you are not supposed to ask, "What does this mean?" in the way you might ask about a word in a dictionary. Instead, you are meant to let the carving sink into you, to let it move through your thoughts like water through soil, until meaning rises on its own. There is something haunting about knowing that a language is slipping away. Imagine finding a book in a language no one can read anymore. You hold it in your hands, you see the letters, but they do not speak to you. You know there is meaning there, perhaps something profound, but it is locked behind a door for which you do not have the key. That is how the petroglyphs feel. They are a book with missing pages, a voice muffled by centuries of wind and rain. And yet, even without knowing the full meaning, you can feel something when you look at them. A connection, a sense of presence. Perhaps that is what makes them sacred. Not that we can understand every line, but that we can still feel their weight. It is like standing in a cathedral and feeling awe, even if you do not know the stories in the stained glass. The stones speak in ways beyond words. The carvings were first revealed to outsiders after the Great Forest Fire of 1881, when the flames cleared the thick brush that had hidden them. For generations before that, the stones had been known only to the local native communities, who visited quietly, leaving offerings and prayers. But after the fire, others came curious: settlers, amateur archaeologists, even vandals. Some traced the carvings with chalk to make them stand out, not realizing that the chalk and scrubbing would damage the fragile sandstone. Others, sadly, carved their own names into the rock, erasing parts of the ancient figures. The language was already fading, and these acts pushed it closer to silence. Today, efforts are being made to protect the site. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources and the Saginaw Chippewa tribe now co-manage the petroglyphs, ensuring that ceremonies are held and the stones are treated with the respect they deserve. Visitors walk on wooden platforms, keeping their feet and hands away from the carvings. There are signs asking for quiet, as though reminding people that this is not just a tourist spot, but a place of spirit. Still, no amount of preservation can stop the slow work of time. Every year, the rain takes a little more of the carvings. Every winter, ice cracks the stone a little deeper. We are watching a language slowly vanish, and there is no way to bring it fully back. What would it mean to lose this language completely? It would be more than the loss of history or art. It would be the loss of a voice, a way of seeing the world that is different from our own. These carvings remind us that the people who lived here long ago had their own understanding of life, of the land, of the sacred. They lived in harmony with the forests and waters, seeing them not as resources to be used, but as relatives to be honored. To lose their language is to lose a way of thinking that the modern world desperately needs to remember. But perhaps the language is not entirely lost. Perhaps it is simply waiting. There are elders who can still read pieces of it, who can look at a carving and tell a story that stretches back through generations. They say that understanding these symbols is not about studying them like a puzzle, but about living with them, sitting with them, letting them teach you. Maybe that is what we have forgotten, that some languages cannot be rushed, cannot be translated into quick, easy words. They require time, patience, and respect. The spirit with horns, the bowmen, the turtles, and birds. Each of these figures is like a letter in this sacred language. Alone, they are beautiful. Together they tell a story that is larger than any one of them. We may never know the full story, but that does not mean we cannot listen. It means we have to learn a new way of listening. One that is slower, quieter, more open. As the sun begins to set and the forest grows dim, the carvings seem to change. Shadows fill their grooves, making them stand out in ways they didn't under the harsh midday light. The spirit with horns seems taller, its rays stretching like arms. The bowman's arrow points into the dark, as if aiming at something beyond sight. The turtles seem to crawl across the stone, their shells glinting in the fading light. In these moments, the sacred language feels alive again, as though the stone is speaking to the night. If you linger here long enough, you may begin to feel as though you are being taught something, not in words but in feelings. You might feel a deep sense of connection to the land, as though the trees and rocks and streams are not separate from you but part of you. You might feel gratitude for the people who left these carvings behind, for the stories they cared enough to carve into stone, so that we, centuries later, might stand here and wonder. The language may be fading, but it is not gone. It lives in the quiet between breaths, in the rustle of leaves, in the way your heart beats when you touch the old stone. It is a language of symbols, but also of silence, and sometimes silence speaks the loudest. The elder stories that refuse to fade. There are stories that hold on even when everything around them begins to disappear. Stories so deeply rooted in the land that no storm or passing of time can sweep them away. They are carried not just by words but by memory, by breath, by the rhythm of generations who speak them softly so that they will never be forgotten. In Michigan, beneath the quiet sweep of forests and the echo of lakes, these stories live on, told by elders who remember, not because they read them in books, but because they feel them in their bones. The elders' stories are like warm fires in the cold, flickering but steadfast, their light casting long shadows that stretch into the past. And though the modern world moves fast, these stories refuse to fade, as if the land itself whispers them into being whenever someone is willing to listen. The elders speak of a time before the world was shaped as it is now, before the lakes filled with water and the forests stretched their arms into the sky. They tell of beings who moved like shadows between the trees, spirits who sang to the stones and shaped the rivers with their hands. These are not simply myths or fairy tales, they are truths wrapped in layers of meaning, truths that teach and guide. The younger generations might not always understand, but the elders know that each story carries a seed, a lesson that will bloom when the time is right. One elder, sitting by the fire on a cold evening, might tell you about the spirit with horns who watches over the woods. This spirit, they say, has been there since the first dawn. It does not speak in words but in signs, shifts in the wind, the sudden flight of a bird, the crack of a branch when everything else is still. If you wander too deep into the forest without respect, the spirit might test you. It might show itself not to frighten, but to remind you that the land is alive and listening. The elder will pause, their gaze distant, as though they can still see the spirit's form in the shadows between the trees. You feel the weight of the story pressing against you, a reminder that some things are not meant to be forgotten. Another story tells of the bowman carved into the Sanilac Petroglyphs. The elders say he is not just a hunter, but a guardian. His arrow is drawn and waiting, not to strike prey, but to protect the sacred paths that cross this land. He stands between worlds, the physical and the spiritual, and his presence reminds the people that every step they take on this earth matters. Some say the bowman points toward a star that rises only once a year, a celestial marker of balance and renewal. Others say his arrow is aimed at something we can no longer see, a threat or a promise lost to time. But all agree that his story is part of the larger song of the land, a song the elders still know by heart. The elders' stories are not told with haste, they move like rivers, meandering, circling back, lingering on certain details as if each word is a stone being carefully placed. The younger ones sometimes grow restless, used to quick answers and faster tales, but the elders understand that real stories are not about speed, they are about depth. When they speak, it is as if the world slows down, the crackling of the fire and the rustle of leaves sinking with their voice. You can almost feel the weight of centuries settling in the space between words. These stories are more than entertainment. They are instructions for how to live. They teach about the relationship between humans and the earth, about respect for the animals, about listening to the wind, and watching the patterns of the stars. They remind us that the land is not something we own, but something we belong to, something that remembers every step we take. When an elder tells a story of a lake spirit who demands offerings before safe passage, it is not just a tale of supernatural beings, it is a lesson in gratitude, in acknowledging that the water that sustains us is not to be taken for granted. And yet these stories have been threatened, not just by time, but by forgetting. For generations they were passed orally, shared around fires, whispered in ceremonies, spoken under starlit skies. But when settlers arrived, when new ways of life were forced upon the people, many of these stories were silenced. Elders were told not to speak them. Children were taught to ignore them. Still, the stories persisted. They hid in the folds of memory, waiting for the moment when they could be told again. The elders who hold them now carry both pride and sorrow. They know how close these stories came to being lost, and they know how vital they are to the future. In some communities, ceremonies are returning. Around the petroglyphs, offerings of tobacco are laid gently on the earth, prayers are spoken in the old languages, songs are sung that have not been heard for decades. The elders stand with closed eyes, letting the rhythms of drumbeats awaken the stories that have always lived inside them. They speak of ancestors who traveled these lands long before there were borders or roads, who understood the sacredness of every hill, every tree, every stone. They speak of how the carvings on the sandstone are not just pictures, but doorways into memory, into spirit, into the parts of ourselves we have forgotten. One elder describes the carvings as letters in a language we no longer fully understand. Each animal, each shape is like a syllable, part of a song that tells of the first people and their connection to the stars. He says that when you stand quietly before the carvings at dawn, when the sun's light touches the grooves just right, the story comes alive. You can almost see the figures moving, almost hear the voice of the one who carved them. It is a language not of the mind, but of the heart. To hear it, you have to listen not just with your ears, but with your whole being. The elders' stories often weave together the seen and unseen worlds. They talk of spirits who live in the trees, who guide travelers or warn them of danger. They speak of dreams that are more real than waking life, of visions that show the path ahead. To some, these might sound like myths or superstitions, but to the elders, they are truths. They are part of a way of seeing that does not separate the material from the spiritual, the living from the dead. Everything is connected, everything has a story. Imagine sitting with an elder on a cool evening, the firelight flickering on their face as they speak. Their voice is low and steady, their words carrying a weight you cannot ignore. You realize that this is not just a story but a thread that ties you to the land, to the people who came before, to something much larger than yourself. The world feels different as you listen, deeper, more alive. The trees are not just trees but witnesses, the stones are not just stones but pages of an ancient book. The lakes are not just bodies of water but living beings that remember. The elders often speak of memory as something that lives not just in the mind but in the land itself. The earth remembers everything, the footsteps of those who walked before us, the songs sung to the rivers, the prayers whispered to the stars. When they tell a story, they are not just recalling something from long ago, they are tapping into that living memory, drawing it forth so that it can breathe again. This is why the stories refuse to fade. They are not just held by people, but by the land, by the spirits that move through the forests and waters. There is a story that one elder tells of a great gathering by the lakeshore, long before there were towns or roads. People came from far and wide, bringing gifts, songs and dances. They carved their memories into the stone as a way of leaving something behind for those who would come after. The elder says that if you sit by the water at night and listen closely, you can still hear their voices in the waves, still feel the echo of their drums in the ground beneath you. It is not just a story, it is an invitation to listen, to remember that we are part of something much older than ourselves. These stories are powerful, not because they answer every question, but because they keep the questions alive. Who carved the petroglyphs? What exactly do the symbols mean? Why did they choose this place, this moment in time? The elders do not claim to have all the answers. Instead, they remind us that some mysteries are meant to stay open, to remind us of the depth and beauty of the unknown. To seek understanding is good, but to honor the mystery is just as important. Even now, in a world of screens and noise, the elders' stories find a way to survive. They are told in community gatherings, in classrooms, around fires. They are shared in whispers and songs, in the quiet moments when the world slows down. They are carried by those who know that the past is not just behind us but beneath our feet, in the stones, in the water, in the wind that brushes our faces. And they wait for those who are ready to listen. As night falls, the forest grows still, the stars come out, and the lakes reflect their light like mirrors. You sit with the elder, the fire now only glowing embers, and their story comes to an end. But even in silence, the story lingers. It lives in the rhythm of your heartbeat, in the memory of their voice, in the way the night air feels charged with something unseen. You realize that this story, like the carvings in the stone, is now part of you, and no matter how much time passes, it will not fade. A trail of carvings across the Great Lakes. There is a story written across the landscape of the Great Lakes, one that cannot be found in books or recorded in neat lines of ink. It is a story carved into stone, scattered across ridges and hidden beneath centuries of moss and leaves, waiting for anyone patient enough to follow its path. From Michigan's Thumb region to the distant shores of Ontario, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, there exists a network of petroglyphs, mysterious markings left behind by ancient hands that seem to whisper across time. These carvings form a trail, not of roads or footsteps, but of symbols, an unbroken line of silent messages that suggest the presence of something larger, something that connects all these places together. When you stand before one of these carvings, whether it is a lone figure etched into sandstone or a series of abstract spirals, it feels as though you are stepping into someone else's dream. The grooves in the rock, shallow yet deliberate, invite your fingers to trace them, to imagine the hands that created them long ago. Who carved them? What stories did they tell? Were they maps of real places, or of spiritual journeys meant to guide those who understood their meaning? These questions echo like soft ripples on the surface of the lakes, and while answers remain elusive, the carvings themselves endure. The Sanilac Petroglyphs are often thought of as the heart of this trail, a starting point where symbols of hunters, animals, and spirit beings come alive in the sandstone. But as you move beyond Michigan's forests, more carvings appear. Along the rocky outcrops of Ontario's shores, you can find figures that seem to mirror those at Sanilac: bowmen, turtles, circles representing the sun or the moon, and strange marks that defy easy interpretation. Were these messages sent from one community to another, a form of communication stretching hundreds of miles? Some researchers believe they were part of a sacred network, guiding tribes along waterways and seasonal paths that connected the Great Lakes like a web. The Great Lakes themselves were once highways, not barriers. Long before roads or railways, the waterways provided routes for travel, trade, and spiritual journeys. The people who lived here knew the currents and the winds like we know the lines on our hands. They moved with the seasons, following the call of fish, the migration of animals, and the rhythm of ceremonies that marked the turning of time. Along these routes they left carvings not just as markers of where they had been, but as reminders of the invisible world that surrounded them. When you look closely, the carvings seem to carry a language of their own. A turtle might signify the earth itself, as many tribes saw the land as resting on the back of a great turtle. A bird might represent a messenger between worlds, a link between the sky and the people below. Spirals might signify cycles, the turning of seasons, the movement of the stars, or even the journey of the soul. Each mark is layered with meaning, and while modern archaeology can only guess at these interpretations, the elders of the Anishinaabe and other tribes hold pieces of these truths. They say these carvings are not just art, but prayers, songs, and teachings carved into the bones of the earth. Imagine following this trail of carvings, as if you were walking in the footsteps of those who made them. You start at Sanilac, where the sandstone glows in the early light of dawn. The air feels heavy with history, as if every tree and every leaf carries the memory of those who once stood here. From there you travel north, tracing the waterways toward Lake Huron, Along the way, you might find smaller stones with faint markings, barely visible under the moss. Each one feels like a whisper, a fragment of a much larger story waiting to be pieced together. As you cross into Ontario, the trail becomes clearer. Here, near the waters of the Canadian Shield, ancient carvings are etched into harder rock granite surfaces smoothed by glaciers thousands of years ago. The figures are weathered but still sharp, standing out in the sunlight like shadows frozen in time. Some show human forms with outstretched arms, as if calling to the sky. Others depict animals, moose, fish, and birds, all arranged in ways that suggest stories or ceremonies we can only guess at. One of the most fascinating sites is near Peterborough, Ontario, where over 1,000 petroglyphs are carved into a single expanse of rock. This place is considered sacred, and when you stand there, it feels like being in the center of a map drawn not of land but of spirit. The carvings show not just the visible world but the unseen, the dreams, visions, and ancestors that guided the people. It is said that these carvings were created during vision quests, times when shamans or hunters would seek guidance from the spirits. They would carve what they saw, leaving behind a permanent record of their journey. Following this trail westward, you find similar markings along the shores of Wisconsin and Minnesota. Here, near the rivers and lakes that flow into Superior and beyond, there are petroglyphs of canoes, paddlers, and spirit beings with horns or rays around their heads. The patterns are familiar yet unique, as if each community added its own verse to a larger song. Some of these carvings are so remote that few people have seen them in person. They lie hidden in the woods or along cliffs, far from roads or towns, waiting for those willing to seek them out. There are stories among the elders that these carvings once formed a path of teaching, a trail not just of physical places but of spiritual lessons. A young person on their rite of passage might travel from site to site, guided by elders who explained the meanings of each carving. At one stone, they would learn about respect for the animals. At another, they would be taught the ways of the stars. Each stop along the trail was like a chapter in a book, but one written not in ink but in the language of stone and spirit. Modern researchers have tried to piece together this network, but the trail is fragmented. Many carvings have been lost to erosion, vandalism, or simply the passage of time. Some stones were destroyed before their importance was understood, used for construction, or left to weather away. Others may still be hidden beneath the forests and waters, waiting to be rediscovered. The thought of all that has been lost is heartbreaking, like pages torn from a sacred storybook. And yet, enough remains to give us glimpses of the whole, a trail of symbols leading us back to a time when the world felt alive with meaning. Standing on a quiet shore looking out over the waters of Superior or Huron, it is easy to imagine the people who once traveled these same routes. Their canoes would glide across the surface, carrying families, traders, hunters, and spiritual leaders. At night, they would camp along the shores, the sound of waves mixing with the crackle of fire. Stories would be told of the spirits in the stones, of the animals carved into the rocks, of the great beings who shaped the land. These stories were not just entertainment, they were how knowledge was passed down, how the people remembered who they were and where they came from. The carvings themselves are like silent storytellers, even without words they speak. You can feel their presence when you stand close, as if they are trying to reach across centuries to remind us of something we have forgotten. Perhaps that is why they still hold such power today. In a world where so much is disposable and fleeting, these carvings endure. They remind us that there was once a time when people took the time to carve their truths into stone, knowing it might outlast them. And what of the stories we cannot see? Elders say there are carvings that were never meant to be found by everyone. Some are hidden in places that can only be reached through ceremony or dream. These are the sacred teachings, the deepest parts of the trail that only reveal themselves to those who are ready. It is said that when you are in the right state of mind, the land itself will guide you to these places, as if the stones are calling you home. The trail of carvings across the Great Lakes is not just a relic of the past, it is alive, a living thread that connects the people to their ancestors and to the land. Every time someone visits a petroglyph site with respect, every time an elder shares a story, the trail grows stronger. It is not about solving every mystery or decoding every symbol. It is about listening to the stones, to the wind, to the whispers that rise from the lakes at night. As the sun sets over the water, the carvings take on a different look. The low light deepens their grooves, making them stand out as if freshly carved. You can almost imagine the hands moving over the stone, the careful strikes of a tool, the breath of someone focused on capturing a vision. In that moment, time seems to blur. You are not just standing in the present, You are standing in all the moments that have come before, connected to the people who first left these marks. This trail, this story of carvings across the Great Lakes, may never be fully understood, but perhaps that is not the point. The mystery is part of its power. It invites us to slow down, to wonder, to remember that the world is filled with stories we cannot see, but can still feel. And as long as someone is willing to listen, to walk softly along the path of these stones, the trail will never truly fade. The carvings themselves are like silent storytellers. Even without words, they speak. You can feel their presence when you stand close, as if they are trying to reach across centuries to remind us of something we have forgotten. Perhaps that is why they still hold such power today. In a world where so much is disposable and fleeting, these carvings endure. They remind us that there was once a time when people took the time to carve their truths into stone, knowing it might outlast them. Ancient copper that vanished without a trace. There are mysteries that lie quietly beneath the surface of our world, waiting to be uncovered. And sometimes, when they are revealed, they lead to questions so profound, they seem to echo across centuries with no clear answers. One such mystery is hidden beneath the cold, restless waters of Lake Superior and the remote wilderness of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It is a mystery of metal of pure copper so rich and abundant that it could be pried directly from the ground, polished and shaped without the need for smelting. For thousands of years, this copper was mined by hands that left almost no trace of themselves behind. The strangest part is not that the copper was taken, it's where all that copper went. Because if the stories and evidence are true, over 500,000 tons of copper were removed from the ground in ancient times, yet almost none of it can be accounted for today. It is as though the copper simply vanished into the air, leaving behind only hollow pits, silent tools, and a mystery that refuses to fade. Far out in the rugged, wind-swept expanse of Lake Superior, Isle Royale rises from the water like a forgotten fortress. Today, it is known as a national park, home to moose, wolves, and dense forests. But hidden beneath its soil and rocky ridges is one of the most enigmatic chapters in North America's ancient history. Thousands of years ago, long before Europeans arrived, this island was a hub of mining activity. Ancient miners used stone hammers, fire, and sheer determination to extract copper from veins that ran like hidden rivers through the bedrock. When archaeologists first began studying the island's old pits, they were astonished by their scale. Some pits were over 20 feet deep, carved into the rock with nothing but primitive tools. The miners used fire to heat the stone, and then poured water over it, causing the rock to crack and making it easier to pry out chunks of copper. It was grueling, dangerous work, done entirely by hand. And yet, somehow they managed to remove staggering quantities of this precious metal. The question that haunts researchers today is simple: where did all that copper go? Native American tribes across the region are known to have worked copper for tools, ornaments, and ceremonial items, but the total amount of copper found in their archaeological sites does not even begin to approach the hundreds of thousands of tons that were taken. It is as though we are looking at a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. Some scholars suggest that the copper was traded across the continent, passed from tribe to tribe in an immense network of exchange. There is evidence to support this. Great Lakes copper has been found as far away as the Hopewell Mounds of Ohio, and even in ancient sites near the Gulf of Mexico. But even if this trade network was vast, the math doesn't add up. How could such an unimaginable volume of copper have been mined and distributed, leaving so little trace? Theories begin to emerge when questions grow this large. Some researchers believe the copper may have been hoarded or used in ways that have not survived the passage of time, perhaps melted down into thin sheets that corroded beyond recognition, or transformed into ceremonial offerings that were never meant to be found. But others look at the timeline of this mining activity, dating back some 5,000 to 7,000 years, and begin to wonder if there might have been something far older, far more complex at work. Could there have been ancient civilizations, now long vanished, who took this copper for purposes we cannot imagine? Could some of it have even traveled across oceans, traded with cultures we do not traditionally link to North America? These are questions mainstream archaeology is reluctant to explore, but the mystery remains. When you stand on Isle Royale and feel the wind coming off Lake Superior, you cannot help but feel the weight of this history pressing in. The ancient miners left behind hammerstones, worn smooth by years of striking copper and rock. You can almost see them in your mind, groups of men and women working by the light of fires, their faces illuminated by the glow of freshly revealed copper veins. There would have been a rhythm to their work, the sound of stones striking metal echoing through the trees. Perhaps there were songs, prayers, or offerings to the spirits of the earth before each new excavation. Copper was not just a material to them, it was a gift from the earth, a connection to something greater. It gleamed with a warm reddish light, like frozen sunlight pulled from the ground. One of the most striking things about the copper of this region is its purity. Unlike many other metals, the copper here needed no refining. It could be hammered and shaped directly into tools, arrowheads, jewelry, or plates. Archaeologists have found copper fishhooks, knives, and decorative beads that date back thousands of years, all crafted with remarkable skill. The people who mined this copper were not primitive laborers, they were artisans, guided by both practical knowledge and spiritual reverence. Every piece of copper they shaped was part of a larger relationship with the land, a dialogue between human hands and the living earth. Yet the mystery persists. If the ancient people of the Great Lakes were the only ones using this copper, where are all the artifacts? The tools and ornaments we have discovered are just a tiny fraction of what should exist. This has led to more speculative theories, ideas that push the boundaries of conventional history. Some fringe researchers have suggested that ancient mariners from Europe or even civilizations like the Minoans or Phoenicians may have traveled across the Atlantic to trade for this copper. They point to similarities in metalworking techniques and argue that such large-scale mining would have required an organized, almost industrial effort that might not fit the timeline of local tribes. Mainstream scholars dismiss these claims, but the lack of concrete answers keeps the speculation alive. Is it possible that entire caches of copper artifacts still lie buried, undiscovered beneath layers of soil and forest? Could there be underwater deposits, hidden beneath the shifting sands of the Great Lakes, waiting to be uncovered? Some divers have reported strange shapes and metallic glints deep below the surface of Lake Superior, but the waters are cold, vast, and often treacherous, making exploration difficult. What we know for sure is that the story of this ancient copper is far from complete. Travelers who visit Isle Royale today often remark on the silence. It is a place that feels untouched by time, a place where the modern world seems to fall away. When you walk along the trails and see the old mining pits, now filled with rainwater and moss, you cannot help but feel a sense of awe. These pits are not just holes in the ground, they are windows into a past we barely understand. The hammerstones scattered nearby still bear the marks of countless blows, each one a testament to the persistence and skill of those who worked here. The copper veins, now long empty, once shone like fire in the darkness of the earth. To imagine what it must have been like to strike a blow and see a flash of red metal emerge is to connect, if only briefly, with those ancient hands. The copper mystery is not confined to Isle Royale alone. Across the Kicking Peninsula, the ground is littered with similar evidence, pits, slag and hammerstones that tell of a mining culture spread across the entire region. Some pits are so remote that they were only discovered in the last century, hidden beneath thick layers of forest growth. It is said that there are over 10,000 such pits scattered across Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The scale of this effort is staggering. It suggests not just small scattered bands of miners, but organized groups with the knowledge, tools and endurance to carry out massive extraction projects over many generations. When we think of ancient mining, we often imagine crude tools and slow progress, but the people of the Great Lakes were remarkably efficient. They understood how to read the land, how to find the rich veins of copper, and how to extract it with minimal waste. The stone hammers they used, often made of hard basalt or granite, are still found by the hundreds, their surfaces worn smooth from years of use. Archaeologists have even found wooden shovels preserved in the soil, their handles shaped with care, still bearing the marks of human hands from thousands of years ago. Yet the greatest question remains, why? Why mine so much copper, far beyond what seems necessary for tools and ornaments? Was there some other purpose we no longer understand? Could the copper have been part of spiritual practices, offerings to the gods or spirits of the earth? Or was it something more practical, a resource so valuable that it was hoarded, traded and carried far beyond the boundaries of the Great Lakes? Some elders among Native American tribes speak of the copper as a living being, a gift from the underworld that had to be treated with respect. They tell stories of spirits who guarded the copper, who would punish those who took too much or acted without reverence. Perhaps this is why the mining pits feel so quiet today, as though the land itself is holding its breath. The copper is gone, but the spirit of the place remains, watching, waiting. There is also a deep sadness when we think about what has been lost. Much of the history of these ancient miners is gone, erased by time, colonization, and neglect. Their language, their songs, their reasons for mining this copper. So much of it has vanished, leaving only traces for us to piece together. And yet, even in this silence, there is a sense of resilience. The copper may be gone, but the story remains. It lingers in the pits, in the hammerstones, in the glint of a copper artifact pulled from the ground after thousands of years. It lingers in the questions we ask, in the awe we feel when we stand on Isle Royale and look out over the endless waters of Lake Superior. Imagine standing on the shore at night, the stars reflecting in the dark water, the wind carrying a chill from the north. You think about the miners who once stood here, watching the same stars, hearing the same waves. Perhaps they wondered, as we do now, what their work would mean to the future. Did they imagine that thousands of years later, people would still be trying to understand why they mined so much copper, where it all went and what it meant? Perhaps they didn't need answers. Perhaps for them the act of mining, of shaping, of connecting with the earth, was meaning enough. The mystery of the vanished copper is not just a question of archaeology, it is a reminder of how much we still don't know about the world we live in. It is easy to think that history is a neat line, a series of events we can trace from past to present, but the copper tells a different story. It tells of gaps, of silences, of mysteries that defy simple explanations. It invites us to listen more closely, to pay attention to the quiet clues left behind by those who came before us. And so the copper remains both a presence and an absence. It is gone, but it is also here, in the pits, in the artifacts, in the stories that are still told. It is in the wind that rushes through the pines of Isle Royale, in the waves that break against its rocky shores. It is in the questions we carry as we walk through this ancient landscape, wondering what it would have been like to hold a piece of freshly mined copper, glowing red in the light of a campfire. The mystery endures, and maybe that is as it should be. Some stories are not meant to be fully solved. Some stories live on in the not knowing, in the whispers of the land, in the feeling that somewhere just beyond our understanding, the truth is waiting. The forgotten miners of Isle Royale, far out in the cold, endless stretch of Lake Superior, where the horizon blends with the sky and the water shifts from silver to storm grey in a heartbeat, there lies an island that feels as though it was carved out of another time. Isle Royale stands alone, quiet and remote, its forests dense and dark, its rocky shores jagged and untouched by modern noise. It is a place of solitude, where the air carries only the sigh of the wind through the spruce trees, the call of distant loons, and the rhythmic crash of waves against stone. To set foot here is to step into a world that seems to have stood still for centuries. But beneath the beauty of its rugged landscapes and tranquil silence lies one of the greatest enigmas of North American prehistory, a mystery of miners who came here thousands of years ago, who dug deep into the island's bones for copper, and who vanished without leaving a single written word to tell their story. The first time you arrive on Isle Royale, perhaps by ferry cutting through Superior's rolling waves, you sense immediately that this is not just another place. It is a presence. The island doesn't simply exist. It watches, it remembers, and when you walk its trails through the shadows of white birch and towering fir, you begin to notice strange depressions in the earth. Pits lined with moss and filled with rainwater, some shallow, others eerily deep. These are not natural. They are the scars left behind by people who worked this land with an intensity we can barely imagine. People who extracted copper with nothing but stone tools and fire, who turned this wilderness into an ancient workshop of unimaginable scale. It's hard to picture what life must have been like for these miners thousands of years ago. Archaeologists tell us that this activity dates back at least 5,000 years, to the Archaic period, when the glaciers had only recently retreated from the Great Lakes. These people were not farmers or city builders. They were hunter-gatherers, living close to the land, moving with the seasons, and yet they accomplished something extraordinary here. Using hammerstones, fire-setting techniques and bone or wood wedges, they dug out copper deposits that lay hidden beneath the island's basalt and sandstone ridges. They worked with precision, carefully prying out the raw metal that could be shaped into tools, ornaments, and ceremonial objects. If you pause at one of these ancient pits, you can almost hear the rhythm of their work, the thud of a hammerstone against rock, the crackle of fire as it heats the stone face, the hiss of water cooling the rock, fracturing it with sudden force, and then the quiet scraping as hands pull free a gleaming sheet of copper, raw and shining like a frozen flame. The copper here is unique. It doesn't require smelting, as it appears in nearly pure form, ready to be shaped by skilled hands. For those ancient peoples, this was more than a resource. It was a treasure, a gift from the earth itself. The scale of their labor is staggering. Across Isle Royale and the nearby Keweenaw Peninsula, there are an estimated 10,000 ancient mining pits. Some are small and shallow, others plunge more than 20 feet deep. Over centuries of work, it's believed that these miners removed more than 500,000 tons of pure copper, 500,000 tons, carved out, piece by piece, without iron tools or modern machines. The very thought of it stirs the imagination. Who were these people? How did they organize such an enormous effort? What drove them to return year after year, generation after generation, to this isolated island? And then comes the greater mystery. Where did all that copper go? The archaeological record, as rich as it is, provides only fragments of an answer. We know that copper artifacts made from Isle Royale's mines have been found across North America. Delicate beads, spear points, fish hooks, knives, and ceremonial plaques. These items have turned up in places as far away as Ohio, in the Hopewell Mounds, and even in the Mississippi River Valley. But the total volume of discovered artifacts accounts for only a tiny fraction of the copper that was mined. The rest seems to have vanished into the shadows of history. Some scholars suggest that this copper was traded along vast indigenous trade networks that spanned the continent. Imagine, if you will, a copper blade that was pulled from Isle Royale's bedrock, passed from hand to hand along rivers and trails, until it reached a village on the Gulf of Mexico or the plains of the Southwest. It's not impossible. Native American trade routes were extensive and sophisticated, connecting far-flung communities through rivers, lakes, and overland portages. But even with such networks, the numbers don't add up. 500,000 tons is a staggering amount of metal, far beyond what has been found or accounted for. This gap in the record has led some to speculate more wildly. Fringe theories claim that seafaring cultures from across the Atlantic, perhaps from the Mediterranean or even Egypt, might have ventured to the Great Lakes to harvest copper during the Bronze Age. Could the copper from Isle Royale have found its way into the tools and weapons of ancient Europe? Mainstream archaeology dismisses these ideas, citing the lack of hard evidence, and yet, standing on the island's rocky shore, with the horizon stretching empty and vast, one cannot help but wonder, if the Phoenicians or Minoans had crossed oceans, would we even know? Could some forgotten encounter have left no trace but the copper that passed into their hands? Speculation aside, what remains undeniable is the presence of the miners themselves. Their tools tell a story, even if they left no written words. Hammerstones, their surfaces pitted and smooth, lie scattered near the pits, as though the workers set them down just yesterday. Broken pieces of copper, half-shaped and abandoned, gleam faintly beneath layers of soil. There are grooves and scars in the bedrock where tools struck again and again. Each mark is a voice, silent but persistent, telling us we were here, we worked, we shaped this place. There is also something spiritual in their work. Among the Ojibwe and other Great Lakes tribes, copper is considered sacred, tied to the Manitou, the spirit beings that inhabit all things. It's likely that the ancient miners shared this reverence. They may have sung songs or made offerings before cutting into the earth, acknowledging the spirits that guarded the copper. Perhaps they believed that the metal carried a piece of the lake's spirit, its cool shine reflecting the energy of water and sky. To take copper from the ground may not have been seen as mere labor, but as a dialogue with the natural world, a conversation between humans and the unseen forces that shaped their lives. If you sit by one of these pits at dusk, as the forest darkens and the first stars appear overhead, you might feel that connection still. The air grows still, the water of the lake turns black, reflecting the moon in broken ripples. And for a moment, it's easy to believe that time has folded back on itself, that the miners are just beyond the tree line, their campfires glowing softly in the distance, their voices carried faintly on the wind. Archaeologists continue to study these mines, hoping to piece together more of their story. They analyze the hammerstones, searching for patterns of wear. They study the copper artifacts found in burial sites and trading posts, tracing their chemical signatures back to the mines of Isle Royale. And yet, despite decades of work, so many questions remain unanswered. Were these miners part of a single culture, or many different groups who came to the island over thousands of years? Did they live on the island year-round, or did they arrive in waves during the summer, leaving as the lake froze in winter? Were they simply seeking materials for survival, or did copper hold a deeper, perhaps ceremonial meaning for them? There are stories, too, of ancient campsites hidden beneath the forest, of stone tools found far from the known mining pits, suggesting that the miners may have moved across the island, following the veins of copper like a trail. Some even speak of legends, whispers of people who vanished mysteriously, swallowed by the lake or claimed by the spirits of the land. Lake Superior has always been a place of power, unpredictable, and sometimes deadly. Its storms can rise without warning, turning the water into a churning field of whitecaps and foam. Perhaps some of these ancient miners never made it back to the mainland. Perhaps their spirits linger here still, watching over the mines they once worked with such devotion. To walk through the forest of Isle Royale today is to walk among ghosts. The wind moves the branches, the lake crashes softly against the rocks, and you can almost sense the presence of those who came before. It is humbling, this reminder that history is not just the story of kings and cities, but also of unknown hands and forgotten lives, of people who labored in silence and left behind only the faintest traces of their existence. The forgotten miners of Isle Royale may never speak to us directly, but their story is written in the land itself, in every moss-covered pit and every weathered hammerstone. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps in the end, the silence of Isle Royale speaks louder than words ever could. It tells us that the past is never truly gone. It lingers in the rocks, in the water, in the whisper of the wind through the trees. All we have to do is listen. Lost tools of an unknown age. There are places in the world where time doesn't simply pass. It lingers. It hangs in the air, like mist on a cool morning, whispering through the trees and settling over stones that have seen more than we can imagine. Michigan, with its quiet forests, its glimmering lakes, and its windswept shorelines, is such a place. Beneath the surface beauty of its landscapes lies a deeper, stranger story, one carved into rock, buried beneath moss and soil, and scattered in the form of tools, left by hands, that vanished long before history began keeping track. These are the lost tools of an unknown age, relics that speak without words, silent echoes of a people we know almost nothing about. Yet, as with all mysteries, the more we uncover, the more the questions grow. If you were to wander through Michigan's Upper Peninsula on a foggy morning, you might stumble upon something unexpected, a rounded stone smooth and scarred in ways that don't seem natural. A shallow depression in the earth, half filled with water, its edges lined with fragments of rock that seem deliberately broken. These may not look like much at first glance, perhaps just stones scattered by the forces of nature, but to an observant eye, they are the remains of something remarkable. They are the tools and traces of an ancient industry, one that predates modern memory by thousands of years. The copper-rich lands of Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula are at the heart of this story. Long before European settlers ever laid eyes on Lake Superior, long before even the Ojibwe and Potawatomi tribes built their traditions around these waters, there were people here, mining copper with tools so simple and so worn by time that they seem almost unreal. Archaeologists have found hammerstones, rounded lake rocks, some small enough to fit in a palm, others the size of a melon, with their surfaces chipped and battered from striking metal-bearing rock. These tools are quiet witnesses to a world we can only imagine, a time when the forests were younger, when the lakes stretched like unbroken mirrors beneath the sky, and when human life here was lived in rhythms we no longer remember. To picture these miners is to picture persistence. They would arrive at the shores of Isle Royale, perhaps by birch-bark canoe, gliding over the cold waters of Superior, the horizon stretching endlessly around them. The journey alone would have been treacherous. Superior is not a forgiving lake. Its storms rise suddenly, its waves can swallow boats whole, and yet, these people came here, again and again, over centuries. Why? For the copper. For the red gold metal that lay hidden within the dark basalt ridges, waiting to be freed by fire, water, and stone. The process was slow, almost painfully so. To extract copper, the miners would first build fires against the rock face, heating it until the stone began to crack and weaken. Then, using hammerstones and wedges made from antler or hard wood, they would chip away, bit by bit, prying out the shining sheets of native copper. There were no machines, no metal chisels, only patience, skill, and the raw strength of human hands. When we look at the remnants of these mining pits today, overgrown with moss and filled with the silence of the forest, it is easy to underestimate what was accomplished here. But make no mistake, this was a massive effort, one that would challenge even modern workers if they were given only stone and fire to work with. Over time, these miners removed a staggering amount of copper from the region. Some estimates suggest more than 500,000 tons were taken from Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula combined. That is an almost unimaginable quantity, especially when you consider that each piece of copper had to be freed by hand, carried by canoe, and traded or transported across vast distances. And yet, the most haunting part of this story is not how the copper was mined, but what became of it. Where did it go? Who used it? What stories are hidden in the tools and ornaments it was shaped into? The tools that have survived tell only fragments of the tale. Hammerstones, grooved mauls, stone wedges, these are found scattered across the mining sites, often buried beneath layers of soil and leaf litter. Some have grooves worn into them from years of use, as if the hands that gripped them worked until the stone itself bore the memory of their labor. These are not crude or careless objects. They are shaped by purpose, by an understanding of how to work with the materials at hand. They speak of a people who knew the land intimately, who understood fire and stone and water, and who saw in the copper something worth all the effort. But beyond the tools, there is silence. These miners left no written records, no carved monuments, no signs of permanent villages near the mining pits. It is as if they appeared for a time, did their work, and then moved on, leaving the forest to reclaim the land. Some scholars believe that the mining was seasonal, tied to the rhythms of migration and trade. The miners may have come here in summer, when the waters were calmer, setting up temporary camps along the shores before returning to the mainland as winter closed in. Others suggest that the copper was not simply a utilitarian material, but a sacred one, collected for ceremonial purposes, or as part of spiritual traditions that we can no longer understand. The indigenous tribes of the region, particularly the Ojibwe, hold copper in deep reverence. In their stories, copper is a gift from the spirits, a metal that carries power and healing. Even today, offerings of tobacco are sometimes made at old copper sites, acknowledging the sacredness of the material. It is not hard to imagine that the ancient miners felt the same way, that each strike of their hammerstone was not just labor, but a kind of conversation with the earth. As you stand near one of these ancient pits today, the weight of that history is almost tangible. The forest around you is quiet, except for the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. The ground is soft with moss, and the air smells of pine and damp stone. You can run your hand over the smooth surface of a hammerstone and feel the grooves worn into it centuries ago. And in that moment, it is easy to imagine the people who once stood here, their faces lit by firelight, their hands stained with earth, their voices rising in the dark. There is a strange intimacy in holding a tool made thousands of years ago. It is as if you are touching the hand of the person who shaped it, as if the memory of their work lingers in the stone itself. Who were they? What did they dream about as they worked? Did they have stories they told by the campfire, legends of how copper came to be, or songs that carried across the water at night? We will never know for certain, but the tools they left behind are more than artifacts. They are messages, even if we can't fully read them. The mystery deepens when we consider the sheer scale of the copper extraction. If only a small fraction of the metal remains in the form of artifacts we've found, beads, knives, fishhooks, then what happened to the rest? Was it lost? Was it buried with the dead, hidden in graves we have yet to uncover? Or does it lie melted into bronze, far across the ocean, a silent link between worlds that history forgot to record? These questions may never have clear answers, but they remind us that the past is not as distant as we sometimes think. It is beneath our feet, waiting to be remembered. In the stillness of the Upper Peninsula, where the forests stretch endless and the lakes shine like mirrors, the lost tools of an unknown age rest quietly. They are patient. They have seen generations rise and fall, storms come and go, civilizations emerge and vanish, and they will be here long after we are gone, holding their secrets in silence, waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear what they have to say. Did these mines once glow under moonlight? There is something about the light of the moon on Lake Superior that feels almost otherworldly. On certain nights, when the sky is clear and the moon is high, the water transforms into a surface of liquid silver. Waves roll gently, catching the pale light, and the island of Isle Royale seems to rise out of the lake like a dark, sleeping giant. The trees stand silent, their branches still as if holding their breath. And somewhere within the dense forests and ancient ridges of this remote island, the old copper mines remain, quietly watching the passing of centuries. It's hard not to wonder, standing there under the glow of the moon, if these mines so old, so filled with mystery, once came alive in this very same light. Did they glow in their own way, under the moonlight? Did the people who dug them thousands of years ago work by the pale silver of the moon when the nights were calm and the lake was still? Or is the glow we speak of not a physical light, but something deeper, a memory, a whisper, a presence that lingers in the earth itself? The copper mines of Isle Royale are unlike anything else in North America. Hidden beneath layers of moss and tangled roots, they are scars carved into the bedrock by hands we will never shake, by people we will never meet, yet whose effort still speaks loudly through time. These mines were first dug thousands of years ago, during what archaeologists call the Archaic period. Back then, the forests would have been younger. the waters of Lake Superior wilder, colder, and even more unpredictable than they are now. And yet, people came here to this remote island, crossing treacherous waters in simple canoes to carve into the dark basalt and free sheets of copper shining like frozen flames. It is believed that this work began at least 5,000 years ago, possibly even earlier. Think about that. Long before the pyramids of Egypt were completed, before Stonehenge was built, people were here, in what we now call Michigan, mining copper by firelight and moonlight, leaving behind traces of their labor but almost no clues about their identity. If you walk through the forests of Isle Royale today, you can still find the pits they left behind. Some are small, filled with rainwater and leaves, their edges softened by time. Others are deeper, dark hollows lined with stones and hidden by decades of moss and lichen. You might pass by one without even noticing it at first, thinking it just another depression in the earth. But if you look closely, you see the signs, the worn edges, the scatter of hammerstones nearby, the fragments of copper embedded in the soil. It's a quiet kind of archaeology, where the evidence doesn't shout but whispers, waiting for you to pay attention. And when the moonlight falls on these pits, casting shadows that stretch across the forest floor, you can almost imagine the miners standing there, their silhouettes moving against the glow, their tools flashing as they strike the rock, to moonlight. The process they used was both simple and ingenious. To break apart the stone and reach the copper veins, the miners would build fires directly against the rock face. The intense heat would cause the stone to expand and crack. Then, when the fire burned down, they would douse the rock with water, causing it to fracture even further. With stone hammers and wedges made of wood or antler, they would pry loose the pieces of copper, working carefully, persistently, until the metal came free. There were no machines, no advanced tools, just human determination, fire, water, and stone. And yet, over time, these people removed an estimated 500,000 tons of copper from the region. 500,000 tons. The sheer scale of it is hard to comprehend, especially when you think about the fact that all of this was done by hand, one strike at a time, generation after generation. But the question that haunts researchers isn't just how they did it, it's where all that copper went. We find copper artifacts scattered across North America, beads, spear points, fish hooks, knives. Many of them have been chemically traced back to the Great Lakes region, proving that copper from Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula traveled far and wide. It was traded along rivers and trails, passed from hand to hand, until it reached communities hundreds or even thousands of miles away. But the number of artifacts we've found doesn't come close to accounting for the amount of copper that was mined. Most of it is simply gone. Did it corrode back into the earth? Was it hidden in places we haven't discovered? Or did it travel even farther, beyond the continent itself? There are those who speculate that ancient seafaring cultures, Phoenicians, Minoans, or even Egyptians, might have come to these shores in search of copper during the Bronze Age. It's a controversial idea, dismissed by mainstream archaeologists, but it lingers like a shadow on the edges of the mystery. What if in some forgotten chapter of human history, the copper from Isle Royale sailed across the Atlantic, its origins lost to time? Whether or not those theories are true, the copper itself holds an undeniable power. To the indigenous tribes of the Great Lakes region, copper was and still is considered sacred. It was not just a practical material for tools and ornaments, it carried spiritual weight. The Ojibwe, for example, speak of copper as a gift from the spirits, something that connects the physical and the spiritual worlds. Offerings were made when copper was taken from the earth, acknowledging its power and the beings that guarded it. It's not hard to imagine that the ancient miners felt the same. Perhaps they worked at night, under the watchful eye of the moon, not just because the cool air made the labor easier, but because they believed the moonlight blessed their work, or revealed things that daylight could not. Standing on the shores of Isle Royale at night, with the moon hanging low over the water, it is easy to believe in such things. The lake itself seems alive in the moonlight, its waves glowing softly, its surface shifting like liquid glass. The forest is filled with subtle sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the occasional crack of a branch, and then there are the silences, the deep, almost breathing stillness that seems to settle over everything. It's in these moments that you start to wonder about the miners. What were their nights like? Did they sit around their fires, sharing stories as the moon rose? Did they sing songs to the lake, to the spirits, to the copper buried in the earth? Did they look up at the same moon we see now, feeling the same mix of wonder and insignificance? There is a certain magic to moonlight. It transforms everything it touches. Stones gleam, water shines, and even the simplest of objects seem to hold secrets. When archaeologists find hammerstones near the old mines, worn smooth by countless strikes, it's easy to see them as just tools. But in the moonlight, they become something else. They become symbols of endurance, of connection, of lives lived in harmony with the natural world. Each hammerstone tells a story not just of work, but of intention. These were not random objects. They were chosen, shaped by hands that understood how to use them. Some of these stones even have grooves worn into them, where they were tied with leather straps to give the miner a better grip. Imagine the hours of labor it would take to wear a groove into solid rock. Imagine the strength, the persistence, the focus, and yet for all their skill and effort, the people who mined this copper remain largely invisible to us. We don't know their names, their languages, or their traditions. We only know them through the things they left behind. The pits, the tools, the scattered fragments of copper. It is as if they existed in the shadows of history, working under the light of the moon, leaving behind whispers that we are only now beginning to hear. Perhaps that is why these mines feel like they still glow under moonlight. Not because of any physical light, but because of the memory of those who once walked here, their presence lingering like a faint shimmer on the edge of perception. Modern archaeologists and tribal elders alike continue to study these sites, trying to piece together the story. There is collaboration now, a recognition that the spiritual significance of these places is just as important as the scientific data they provide. Ceremonies are held at some of the old mining sites, offerings are left, songs are sung, and stories are shared. In these moments, the boundary between past and present feels thin, as if the miners themselves are listening, their work acknowledged once more. Walking through the forest at night, with the moon casting pale light across the ground, you might catch a glint of something in the dirt, a fragment of copper, green with age, a hammerstone, half buried in moss. You pick it up, and for a moment, time folds in on itself. You are holding the same tool that someone held thousands of years ago, under the same moon. You can almost see them, their faces lit by firelight, their eyes reflecting the glow of the metal they worked so hard to free. It is a moment of connection, quiet and profound. The past is not gone, it's just waiting, buried beneath the leaves, glowing softly when the moonlight falls just right. These mines, these tools, these whispers of an unknown age, they are part of something bigger than we can fully grasp. They remind us that the land we walk on is layered with stories, some written, some carved in stone, and some left only as echoes. When you stand on Isle Royale and look out over the lake at night, with the moon shining down and the wind moving through the trees, you feel it, the presence of those who came before, the weight of their work, the glow of their memory, still alive, still watching, still whispering in the moonlight. The legends of Michigan are more than just echoes of the past. They're whispers that still shape the land and stir the imagination. From ancient carvings to secrets buried beneath the lakes, these mysteries remind us how little we truly know about the world around us. Thank you for joining me on this journey through unearthed secrets. If you enjoyed exploring these stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which mystery fascinated you most and where you're watching from. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive.